We are thrilled to have on our next panel some of the long-term leadership in favor of the data transparency transformation. Al Berkeley, the former president of the NASDAQ, was one of the original supporters of the SEC's move toward structured data and remains so. And the organizations represented here, in large part, their support is going to help determine whether financial regulatory reporting moves in the direction of structured data or not. So we're very grateful to have them there. We're also grateful to RDG Filings for its support of our panel, and it's to RDG Filings that I'll now turn over moderating duties. Please help me welcome Jonathan Elliott.
Thank you, Hudson. Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking around so long. This has been a very informative day so far, and I want to thank Hudson and his team at the DTC for putting on yet another great event and continuing to bring so much attention to the open and structured data industry. Research Data Group and RDG Filings provide compliance services and executive compensation plan data for 1,500 public companies each year. We've been involved in structured data and database creation for 25 years and have been working with XBRL specifically for the last 8. We are knee-deep in XBRL, and I'm looking forward to hearing some of the panelists talk about their real-world experience and some of the ways that we can improve and expand structured data. Those of you that were here this morning probably heard Representative Darrell Issa announced he would introduce legislation to require all U.S. financial regulators to transform the information they collect into standardized, open, structured data. This is an exciting development for the future of this industry and for government reporting in general. Many of you in the audience may see structured data as something that has been waiting in the wings for a while. It's sort of been hiding out and has now been thrust into the spotlight with the passage of the Data Act. And while it is true, it has been pushed out pretty quickly. There are those of us that have been immersed in XBRL and structured data for many, many years and have been working through the transition in financial regulation to take disconnected documents and turn them into searchable data. And that transition has actually been going on since the early 2000s. This panel is made up of experts in the financial regulation industry that have been immersed in structured data policies and taxonomies for years, and they know the real-world challenges that come with structured data and implementation of structured data policies. Our hope is that the industry learns from previous implementation issues and can maximize efficiency through proper expansion of structured data into the use by government agencies and beyond. So let's get to the panelists. Please forgive me if I mess up titles a little bit. Some of them are impressively long. James Allen is head of the capital markets policy at the CFA Institute, and his group develops and promotes capital markets positions, policies, and standards for the CFA Institute. Amy Pawlicki is the Director of Business Reporting, Assurance, and Advisory Services and XBRL for the AICPA. Her focus is on developing guidance for assurance and related services to improve the quality, relevance, and usefulness of XBRL information. Rich Cooper is the Vice President for Research and Emerging Issues for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Rich examines the issues that will impact the United States and its private sector over the next 2 to 10 years. He's a long-term thinker, unlike many politicians. And Al Berkeley is the chairman of Princeton Capital Management, and he is the former president of NASDAQ Stock Market. He is a director of the World Economic Forum USA. He was chairman of XBRL US and director of XBRL International. Knows much more about XBRL than any of us. Definitely than I do. So I will now turn it over to Jim Allen for a couple of minutes, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. CFA Institute, of course, is a global organization of investment professionals, about 120,000 members worldwide. Our members are those end users that XBRL is trying to get to. They're the CIOs. Remember, in our neck of the woods, CIO means Chief Investment Officer, not Chief Information Officer. The analysts, the portfolio managers, private wealth managers, and investment advisors. It's sort of, to use that aircraft analogy earlier, you know, if the landing strip is firm, made of tarmac, it's a nice smooth landing. If it's squishy, if the support is squishy, it's going to be a very rough landing. And there's part of the reason, what I was going to talk about just here briefly is some of the reasons why XBRL hasn't really completed the sale with investors as yet. There's a couple of reasons. First is sort of the timing issues. Tagging oftentimes comes after, well, it comes after the filing of the report. There's sort of the dual reporting of the HTML and then the XBRL form. Well, that creates, you know, a timing difference that for analysts who are putting their models together, trying to get their estimates out early into the marketplace, it's less useful to them. Now, it's still going to be useful to investors down the road, the prospective investors, but for those who need to put that information directly into their models right away, it becomes less useful. It's also because it's not universal. It's not applied to documents, filings other than the Qs and the Ks. If you had it for 8Ks, if you had it for the 14Ds, if you had it for the mDNA, the cDNA, it would have more applicability and usefulness to investors in that regard. There's also the need for consistency and comparability. One of the things we've surveyed our membership on is one of the key issues, and reliability is invariably one of the most important things that are out there. And XBRL, we've had some issues with that, with reliability over time. We basically believe that, you know, XBRL is supposed to. The other part of it is the extensibility part. You know, the sort of unlimited extensibility. We believe that XBRL should be able to add clarity to the financial filings, the reports, and the like, rather than sort of abet some of the obfuscation that has started to creep back into some of the financial reporting or financial performance measures. So we believe that that needs to be sort of taken care of as well. And then it also needs to be accessible to all investors. It needs to be, I think as Professor Lewis said in the last panel, that it needs to be something that's easily accessible to by more regular investors. Now, that being said, some of those issues why it hasn't sold the deal. On the positive side, I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, I was really heartened today when Mr. Flannery mentioned about the ABS offerings going to be put on the XBRL. It's going to have the 3 days before the issuance that investors are going to have that information. They're going to have the information on the loan data as well. This is something that we've been writing letters to the SEC since 2006. I think we've at least 3 letters since that time, if not more, on this specific issue, and we're really pleased that it's moving in that direction. Some of the other things, the improvements on some of the disclosures with regard to the mutual funds, as well as some of the corporate governance issues, once again, that Professor Lewis mentioned, corporate governance, executive compensation, and the like. These are things that hold a lot of promise, and therefore we wholeheartedly support the effort. We just would like to make sure that some of these issues that I've mentioned with the timing, the comparability, that sort of thing are taken care of.
Thank you. Al?
I thought I was going to be tailing Charlie later introduced. Well, thank you very much for having me. This is the 15th year I've been trying to deal with XBRL. I remember the day Mike Willis came into my office and said there's this idea about standardizing data and making it comparable. And would NASDAQ mind being a neutral site for some work that PricewaterhouseCoopers would do with Microsoft to show the power of this new standardization? Having been an Air Force officer and being very involved in transportation when I got my MBA at the Wharton School in transportation, and understanding what the railroad, the standardization of railroad gauges had done to the economy of the United States after railroads were introduced, and particularly after the Civil War when they began to be standardized, it was just immediately apparent to me that the payoff would be enormous. What I missed in those thoughts and those enthusiasms would be how threatening it is to bring the transparency of standardization to any regulatory agency, much less one dealing in financial numbers. I think looking back on things that what we missed was that the idea of showing all of the variation that exists in the paper warehouse that was so beautifully presented in the last panel was really not in the best interest of folks who are dealing in a media world that will attack you for showing any weakness. And our inability as a community to show that that's not weakness, it's strength to get to a higher level of thoroughness, a higher level of completeness, a higher level of accuracy. So I had in parallel to these 15 years I've spent looking at and trying to be helpful to the XBRL movement, I was also a member and vice chairman and acting chair of the President's Infrastructure Advisory Council, which started out as a cybersecurity project, cybersecurity only. I did that for 11 years, and in the course of that, realized that we do not optimize our government around the whole of government. We optimize our government around the cabinet laws, title this, title that, title next, that basically creates a congressional committee in the House and in the Senate, an appropriations module, and then a set of laws where those individual government agencies are not at all tuned to anything other than running their own department. And I think that one of the things that we need to get to in standardizing data, and it may be the Treasury and the OMB working together, that may make it work, but we need an agency that is responsible for getting this data standardization done and has teeth in it. And we can come back and talk about that.
Okay. Thank you. Amy, your turn.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks, Al, for giving the railroad analogy. I love that. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I used to work in the railroad industry, believe it or not. So I was asked today to talk about the AICPA's history with XBRL and data standards. For those of you who don't know, the acronym stands for the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And as a professional association representing the accounting profession, to me, one of our strengths has always been the way that we operate, which is through volunteer committees of active members of the accounting profession who come together and work with us on new processes, new techniques to help us innovate and move the profession forward. And the reason I share this with you is because XBRL, the XBRL standard or format, was actually born through that AICPA committee process. It was brought to us by one of our members and made it through the volunteer committee process, and ultimately XBRL International, which oversees the technical specification for XBRL, was spun out of the AICPA. And then in conjunction with the SEC mandate for public company filings in XBRL format, XBRL US, the US jurisdiction, was also spun out of the AICPA as a separate independent, not-for-profit entity. So I think that history is interesting. In the beginning, I'm not going to lie to you, it was not easy for an association that always focused on auditing and accounting standards to get its arms around what is a data standard? You know, who has the right to promulgate these standards, and how are they different from content or process standards like auditing and accounting standards? Fortunately, I think we've come a long, long way from that point. What my team does now focuses really on sort of 4 pillars, one of which is data standards, recognizing that everything we do as a profession really depends on data standards and transparent, accurate information. You know, we sometimes get accused of being self-serving as a profession in terms of the amount of time that we've put into data standards and XBRL, but it really is about building that infrastructure. And that's why I like Al's railroad analogy so much, because not only do we benefit, but companies benefit, investors benefit, regulators benefit, everybody benefits. And so as stewards of the financial reporting and auditing process, we feel that it's our responsibility to play our part and contribute to the development of these data standards and infrastructure to support more transparent and accurate reporting. So in terms of what we do today, we continue to support XBRL International at the board leadership level, and also helping them with a sustainable business model for the maintenance of the spec, which is critical to the relevance of XBRL. We also have a leadership role as an organization on the XBRL US Board of Directors, and we do a tremendous amount of advocacy for XBRL. We have a really strong DC political and legislative affairs team, and they do a great job of helping us monitor relevant legislation and have the opportunity to comment and help with that process. So, you know, for corporate reporting, we really focus right now on helping to enhance the quality of XBRL filings. There's been a couple of references to that today. It is certainly an important issue. I don't think it's at all insurmountable, and there are a couple of initiatives underway right now that will go a long way towards addressing those issues. But beyond corporate reporting, we also do a lot of work to advocate for data standards in what we call the broader footprint. And so one aspect of the broader footprint is XBRL for government reporting, so not just for private sector corporate reporting, but also for government reporting. And so, for example, we would do a lot of education in the early days when Treasury and OFR were considering the use of data standards for the Data Act implementation. But the other aspect of the broader footprint is going back in the reporting channel. And we haven't talked about that much today, but you know, the SEC mandate is for the face of the financial statements. But from an efficiency standpoint, there are opportunities to leverage data standards further back in the process. One example of that is the Audit Data Standards project that AICPA is currently undertaking. That will help to prepare the process for, to facilitate the process of preparers submitting information for internal and external audit, but also for their own internal analysis purposes. All of this work is founded in a recognition that with data digitization and common data exchange and interoperability increasingly being at the forefront of what everyone's working on to improve transparency and efficiency, we can't ignore that as a profession. Other professions are looking at this too, intelligence, healthcare, there's countless number of professions, and we view it as core to what we do. And also, you know, thinking about the promise of big data and analytics, they can only be leveraged effectively in the context of accurate, structured data. So that's why we view data standards as so foundational to everything that we do.
Thank you. Rich?
I get the back cleanup. First of all, thank Hudson and his team for the opportunity to be here. My portfolio at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation allows me to take a look at the issues that are going to be changing business over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And there's a 4-letter word that I've used an awful lot at the Chamber since I joined there over 4 years ago. And it was the 4-letter word that I think is changing every industry, and it's already been talked about here, and that 4-letter word is data. And that, unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons, people see that 4-letter word as being negative. We actually see this as a very empowering 4-letter word as being good, because this is what enables the increased efficiency, the increased understanding to enable more informed decision makers by corporate leaders as well as consumers. But we also see it as enabling increased accountability. Over the past year, we led a study looking at the future of data-driven innovation and came up with 5 different recommendations that we put forward. The one that I want to raise for this particular meeting literally talks about leveraging the open data opportunity. The way that we have seen those resources, the open data resources that are available, these are huge frontiers of possibility. And I'm going to run with since the railroad analogy was opened up here, might as well continue to run with that. This is one of those things that literally can empower not only the larger corporation and more established firms, but it also empowers that entrepreneur, that individual, and as far as getting that increased insight, that increased transparency, and the accountability that I think everybody is looking for. We all want to have that improved understanding of what's happening. This is the tool that opens up that frontier. And so what we've seen is that the open data platforms are a major driver for innovation. When we start to restrict those types of data sets, we are cutting off that opportunity. And so what we are doing in the Chamber Foundation, working with my colleagues like Daniel Castro, as well as a number of other groups, is trying to help people understand what this platform is doing, not just in financial services, but across any number of industries. As it relates to this particular industry, we have taken a look at what's been done with XBRL, and we think it is a great start for what's happening in this area. We want to reinforce those types of things and approaches that are out there so that more people will buy into that structure, because I think we all want to have, we want to have clear and concise tools that don't contribute to any of the chaos that regularly may end up in our lives just because of the daily operations of business. That clear and concise tools that are out there will help us open this open data frontier. So those are a couple quick points that I wanted to offer. The study, I've got copies of the study. We are branching this study off this year, working with Hudson and Daniel Castro and others, looking to the broader network of the Internet of Things and the larger interdependencies that are happening in this. This industry knows far above many others as far as what those interdependencies mean. We want to take those lessons learned and apply those forward so that we can inform policymakers and other business leaders what they need to be doing so that they can, again, leverage the larger open data frontier.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to questions. Al, first one is for you, and we were talking a little bit before the panel about the potential risks to small companies not being included in this data set. What do you see as the potential pitfalls going forward?
Well, I was a research analyst on Wall Street for 24 years before I went to NASDAQ, and you seek the path of least resistance. And I found and still find that if data is not easily available in a company, it's very expensive to follow it. And you're already cursed, particularly in the mid-cap and small-cap market, with low volume, which makes the profitability equation difficult for people writing informative investment insights on you. And if you're not in the databases, you're going to get ignored. And I think you're going to become stigmatized, not unlike the way over-the-counter stocks were stigmatized versus listed stocks. So that it's a really dangerous game to opt out, even though we've got a lot of work to do to get the standardization right. It's a very dangerous game to opt out of being part of that easily accessible data.
Can I add one thing to that? Because there are a number of things that sort of add to what Al's saying. A number of things they've been doing to try to help small companies. The Jobs Act, there's a pilot program on changing and widening the tick sizes. But, the most important thing, I think, is, much like you say, it's letting investors know what you have, what you've got to sell, how your performance is, what your financial condition is, and making that available, making it transparent so that more investors can see it. So.
Yeah. You're seeing a new group of entrepreneurs who recognize the lower cost of the lower cost structure, the lower cost price performance curve that massive computerization is bringing. You're seeing people like equities.com try to get into the market dealing in small and mid-cap stocks in a publishing dimension rather than a broker-dealer or an investment advisor dimension or an investment company dimension. They're trying to do this through publishing, and they won't publish if they can't find the data easily and effectively.
And speaking of the cost, one thing that, if you haven't already seen it, might be of interest is the AICPA and XBRL US did a joint study of the cost of XBRL implementation on an annual basis for small public companies. And that study is published on our website and I believe on XBRL US's website as well. So if anyone's interested in the actual cost of implementation, that's a good study to take a look at.
And if you've got, ask Amy about that, or Campbell Pride's here from XBRL US, and he's a good source of information on those cost issues.
Indeed, that for those of you that may not be involved directly in our industry, and this is new to you, one of the outcries has been the cost of implementing this has been very high and is staying very high, and that study that Amy is talking about actually shows in data terms that the cost has dropped, and then the maintenance factor also has been driven down as well. So there are great benefits to automated reporting, and hopefully the same will hold true for government reporting, driving costs down over time.
If we get to where the Brits are, as you heard earlier, where you don't even know you're putting an XBRL output out from the software industry, the cost effectively is marginally nothing.
Yeah. Very true. Jim, question for you. Along those lines, what do you think are the next logical steps in terms of expansion of structured data and XBRL in particular in financial reporting?
I did sort of briefly touch on this. The expansion into some of the other standardized reports, their filings that companies need to make with the SEC, the 8Ks in particular. Especially those early earnings reports would be very useful. The 14Ds, which is going to include the compensation discussion and analysis, and specifically some of those rather complicated, what are they, tables for executive compensation. Those are particularly good examples of things that would be really beneficial for XBRL. Management discussion and analysis would be another area. I used to, before I started with CFA Institute, I had a publication where I was an analyst on subprime monoline lenders in the 1990s. Talk about a dying industry. But what I used to do was spend a lot of time going through the management discussion analysis, because I was looking at the performance of the securitization portfolios, or the securitization issues that these companies had made in the previous 3-4 years, and trying to compare them. You found all that information either in the MD&A or had to go to a Bloomberg terminal to find it. But making the MD&A one of those other forms that would be benefit from XBRL would be one of the other additions, I think.
All right. Please, any questions from the audience?
Hey, Rich, what a question for you. It seems to me the Chamber's voice is so critical in this debate in terms of countering some of that price question and kind of looking at this in the long term versus the short term. How has the Chamber been able to communicate that not only to its members, but kind of gathering that data and then communicate that back out to audiences in terms of the long view? Are there specifics that you're really hanging your hat on as why the efficiency of this makes so much more sense than just focusing on some of the short-term cost issues?
I did not plant the question. I can tee this up by saying if you come to the Chamber tomorrow to the 9th Annual Capital Markets Summit, that question and others will be addressed. And seriously, tomorrow at the Capital Markets Summit, a lot of those issues are going to be brought up. Tom Quadman and David Hirschman and his team are going to take care of a lot of those things. I don't know what they're going to be saying tomorrow, so it would be presumptuous for me to speak on their behalf, but I do know that that's part of going to be is going to be addressed tomorrow on that. What I would offer on this is what we've seen, and again, I'm going to separate between what the capital market section of the Chamber does on the C6. I'm part of the C3. So, you know, they are more into the details on this than I am. What I've looked at, from my team have looked at with the experts that we've engaged is across the industry, is helping people, first of all, to understand what the open data sets are and what they enable. Because for a lot of these folks, they don't have a full appreciation of how they operate, how they can access, or what are the forms they can access. And I think it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, they end up having to introduce sometimes many people in the same agency to who their chief data architect or chief data officer is. A lot of these companies are still trying to figure that out. Not so much companies, but even internal federal agencies. I have to applaud the work that Joel Gurin has done in this, in the Open Data project that he has done. He has a compass wheel on the, I think it's Open Data 500, that literally will connect persons to the various sort of sectors where his team has already done a bunch of this stuff. So again, he's just one of the resources that I would point to that had helped answer for us what some of those questions have been.
One more? Any other questions from the audience? Yes. Right here.
I have a question for James, I think. You identified several elements that merit standardization and XBRLization. You mentioned non-GAAP items, proxy reports, compensation reports, management analysis, and maybe others. Who do you think should develop those taxonomies, and whether this should be a US exercise or it should be an international initiative?
Couldn't hear.
I think the question was whether or not some of the non-GAAP information, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the non-GAAP data that I was suggesting need to be included from the MD&A, CDNA, and the like, whether that effort should be led by people here in the U.S. or globally. We're CFA Institute's a global organization. Some of our most adamant followers of XBRL are from Europe. We have a gentleman I know from Switzerland in particular who is always trying to push us towards XBRL. I think we would be remiss if we didn't do it on an international basis where we can. I think there are some of those elements that maybe are going to be different. First of all, we always believe that you need to tie things back, those non-GAAP data sources, to GAAP or to the required disclosure requirements, not the international financial reporting standards in Europe and most of the rest of the world. It's U.S. GAAP here, so there's going to be some issues there. I think there's also some issues in the kinds of disclosures that you're going to find with regard to executive compensation. But getting beyond those sorts of things, will we ever see sort of a unified accounting? I don't think we'll see it in my lifetime anyway. So,
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm sorry.
I'm getting the hawk look.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is I just don't. I think it could and probably should be international. Whether or not you're going to have to. I think you're going to have to use. You're going to have to be more national in some of those things, some of the types of disclosures that you have in mind.
Wanted to thank all of our panelists. Thank you very much.